A little girl sat in her room. Her messy brown hair were put into little pigtails as her hazel eyes stared at the door. She hugged her stuffed giraffe close to her little body and listened closely to the loud yells of her father and mother. "I never should have had those damn kids," screamed a loud, deep voice. "All they do is make messes, complain, draw on the walls." He was cut off by a high-angered yell of the girl's mother. "They are children, David! They don't know any better." "Oh, fuck me, Mary Beth. I don't want to hear your bullshit excuses. I just had enough with them. And what do you plan to do about it?" The girl heard loud footsteps coming towards her room as she hugged her giraffe closer. The door was violently open, and in the doorway stood her large, angry, overweight father. In one of his meaty hands held a large textbook. "David, stop it!" screamed her mother. But the father ignored his wife's pleading cries and grabbed the little girl by the collar, and she screamed and kicked, trembling in fear. The girl's father harshly picked up the textbook. "This is for drawing on my fucking walls, you little bitch!" Years later, the little girl known as Natalie was now 9 years old, going through the stage of puberty. She was naturally a little chubby, like usual. She sat in her room watching TV. Her dad was ranting on about some economic crap that she could really give less of a shit about, as she munched on some popcorn. She was also currently drawing a picture, where there was a bit of gore in it, but strangely she liked drawing blood. It gave her some weird satisfaction. Other than that, multitasking was no problem for her. It became apparent to her at a young age, after having to do so much hard work and labor. She was able to do so many things at once. Drawing ended up being her talent and passion. It was her way of escaping from reality whenever something bad would rear its ugly head and peer in, or she was simply bored. She suddenly heard the closing of her door, and she looked to her left, pausing on munching her popcorn. There stood her brother Lucas, who was 14 years old. "What's this?" She could hear her father's yelling from outside her door. "Dad's scaring you?" He let out a chuckle. "No way, I think we're both used to his yelling by now." There was a long pause. "So why you in here?" He seemed to be playing with his sleeves slightly and twitched a bit. "I have to ask you something." He trained his eyes on her. She frowned slightly, growing impatient with her brother interrupting her movie and drawing. "What?" He moved in a little closer. "You said you wanted to be cool and grow up to be like a teenager, right?" She nodded, slightly brightened up suddenly. "Well, I have an offer." "Just spit it out, you dimwit." "You know what guys and girls do together sometimes, right?" The next day at school, Natalie did not say a word. She did not speak for the whole day. She didn't have anyone to speak to anyways. Nobody could know. Nobody should know. And nobody would know. Her teacher picked up on a few puzzled expressions, but she dismissed it as she did not understand the lesson. Natalie also felt as if she were in severe pain. She had no idea it could hurt. Feeling scared, she walked home silently and went to her room. But later in the day, she once again was greeted by her brother. Nobody would know. At school, she finally decided to tell someone. Even though they weren't her friends, she just felt she had to. She walked up to the group of girls, and she would occasionally see the hallway. They looked like nice girls, and Natalie would occasionally talk before. "Hey, Ma," the ginger girl looked over at Natalie, having a straight face. "Yeah? Yeah? I really need to talk to you about something. It's been going on for a while, and you and your friends, well, I feel like you're the only people I can trust." Mia and her friends seemed a little pull smirks, but only for a moment. Little did Natalie knew they were hungry for gossip. "All right, you can trust us. What's up?" One day later, it was all okay. All she took. She had been getting constant remarks on social networking sites, such as Facebook. One time even someone called her a whore. Not to even mention their lunch ended up getting into her hair, and it was the least of her problems. But Natalie, being only 9, could not help but greatly upset at this fact. However, she did not cut. She did not peep, and she never said a word about it. As you may recall, so far in this journey, she had kept everything inside. She supposed it was better. She wouldn't let any pain get the best of her. 3 a.m. school night, her mother was going to kill her. The girl known as Natalie was now 16, and she was a productive in high school, close to her honor roll. For once she felt calm and happy, though like usual, she would occasionally become a hermit in her room, hiding away from her dad who still likes to constantly yell and baby out a comedy, money, politics, and all that bullshit that she was flat out tired of hearing. Her eyes started to feel heavy. She had an assignment to work on, but that was no longer important to her. All that was on her mind was sleep. She closed her laptop, and after her eyes adjusted to the darkness slightly, she saw her old, worn-down stuffed giraffe in the corner. She stared at it in complete and utter silence. Memories passed through her mind, and she felt tears come to her eyes, but quickly she blinked them back. No more breaking, she thought to herself. But she continued to stare at it. "What the fuck are you looking at?" she said to the stuffed object. It simply stared back with soft, black, beady eyes. She shook her head and stood up. She looked down sadly at her little toy animal and gently picked it up in her arms. She cradled it and spoke soft to it. I'm sorry." Some tears ran down her face. She pet through its rough, short fur softly. She lied on her bed. She slowly went to sleep. She has woken up by the angry growls of her mother. She tiredly opened one of her eyes. "I can't believe I forgot to take that laptop away. You were on it all night, weren't you?" Natalie sighed and pressed her face deeper into the pillow, hugging her giraffe closer. Her mother sighed and walked out. She took a shower, brushed her teeth, and ate some breakfast. She then got dressed and she put on a gray-blue hoodie with fur on the inside and the hood. It wasn't her favorite, but it was the only way she could wear to school, due to having the others being in the wash. She also put on black jeans and some thin, fashionable boots. She then finally went down the stairs to get driven to school. She hopped into the car, and her mom sped off towards the school. However, on the way there, due to the lack of sleep, she slowly put her head against the window of the car and started to drift off. Her dreams, or nightmares, I should say, consisted of her physical abuse as a child. Secondly, the sexual abuse from her own brother, Lucas, that lasted for 4 years until she had the guts to turn him off. She started twitching and cringing in her sleep, but her mother took no notice. Her mother never took notice. She was suddenly sharp and awoke by the sound of her mother. "We're here," having an annoyed tone, most likely from her sleeping. She looked at the large sign of the school that read, Walkerville Colleague Institute for the Creative Fine Arts. She sighed tiredly and stepped out, putting her back on her shoulder. "See ya," she proclaimed, closing the car door. She walked up to the school and chatted with a couple friends, until she went up to her locker on the 3rd floor. She grabbed her books, and before the 5 minutes of time was over, she ran to class. Her English teacher annoyingly put her hand on Natalie's desk. "Where's your assignment, Miss Owlett?" Natalie swallowed. I forgot it at home. Sorry, Miss Home Nook." She growled and stood. "Your time is up, Miss Owlett. Don't disappoint me." Natalie seemed puzzled at the thought for a moment. She didn't know why, but those words seemed to melt through her. She simply ignored it and went back to listening to the lesson, falling asleep not too long after, of course. Later that day, she was heading up to her locker for her 4th period, when suddenly her boyfriend Chris came up to her. "Hey, talk to me after school, alright?" She smiled, lovingly to talk to Chris, though strangely she didn't suspect anything. He was always such a sweet guy. During her French class, she dared not to pay any attention. Instead, she doodled the things she loved to draw: blood, gore, people being stabbed, knives, and macabre of things of such. Other people would say it's pretty dark for her to draw such things, but she knew she saw nothing wrong with it. For a strange reason, it actually felt like a normal thing to her. "Miss Owlett?" She quickly recovered her doodle paper and looked up at her French teacher quickly, trying to hide her fear. Yes, Miss Lesevere." She gestured her to move her arm, and with a slight turn of his head, "Show me your work." She hesitantly moved her arm to show the picture of someone getting stabbed by an insane man. The teacher stared at it, puzzled. Looking at her for a bit, she smiled nervously. erase that, and get started on her work," he said in a strangely calm voice. He walked away and sighed before beginning to erase the picture. "And Miss Outlet?" She looked up at him slightly. "Your time is almost up on getting your work done. I suggest doing it now." She growled at the remark. Time has always seemed to be against her. As far as she could care, the time could go fuck itself. After class, she walked out of the school to find her boyfriend standing near the fence on the sidewalk. She smiled and walked over, hoping her day could at least be cheered up by him. But as though she walked closer, her smile only faded. He wasn't smiling back. "Chris, what's wrong? What did you want to talk to me about?" He sighed. "Natalie, I think it's time we should start seeing other people." She felt her heart break. "But why?" He gave her a bit of a stern look. "It's your mindset. Your drawings, they just creep me out. I think there's something really wrong with you. And the saddest part is why you haven't told me you're acting like this. It makes me feel irresponsible, so I just can't do it anymore. I'm sorry." And with that, he began to walk away. Natalie slammed her hands on the bathroom counter at home. She stared at herself in the mirror with her eye twitching. I won't hurt myself like the others. I can stay strong." There was a needle and black thread in her hands. "It's pointless. It doesn't help." Some weird sensation pulled at her subconsciousness. She chuckled slightly. "No, I'm doing it because I want to." She held up the needle with the thread on the end of it and smirked widely. "Your time is up." Piece after piece, cut after cut. Even though excruciating pain was going through her, she did not whine, she did not whimper, she did not cry. There were no more tears to shed. All she did was smile. Blood leaked from her piercings, and she made a low dripping noise into the sink and into the counter. When she was finished, she stood back and admired her handiwork. She stroked at the horrendous stitches on the side of her mouth that spread into a wide smile. She felt the warm, wet blood on her fingers and licked it gently, consuming the metallic tasting liquid in pure ecstasy. She stopped when she saw her mother's reflection in the mirror behind her and sharply turned around. She saw her mother's wide eyes and paled face, and she looked at her fingers seeing blood. She suddenly felt the pain, and she started to cry. "Mom?" She had never felt so confused. What had happened to her? Her mother had scheduled some therapy for her. Natalie had gotten rid of the stitches in fear of how much pain it would bring, so she went to the therapists with them. She made sure her hood was up as to not let anyone see. She sat down on the comfortable leather seat and stared at the blonde woman across from her in silence. "So your name's Natalie, isn't it?" Natalie just nodded. "I'm Deborah, and I'm here to help. Now tell me what have been some of your problems recently." Natalie stared. Time. Time has been my problem." Deborah gave a confused look. "What about time, dear?" Natalie's hands roughly gripped the lever of the seat. "Everything. It makes you live through it, slowly progressing through life and being controlled by society, only to be tortured for seemingly to no end until you no longer have a purpose. It's a vicious cycle. Time does not end. It does not slow down. It does not speed up. It is violent, and it makes you live through torture over and over again, unable to fast forward away from it." Natalie really had no idea what she had just said. She felt like she wasn't herself anymore. Could this be because of all the things she had kept contained? No, it was impossible, but for some strange reason she liked it. The therapist leaned closer. "Sweetheart, I want you to tell me what's happened to you." Natalie still stared. There was a long pause. She smirked slightly as the piercings from her stitches slightly opening again. "Why don't you tell me, Blondie? You're the expert." Deborah seemed to have a bit of an annoyed look. "I can't help unless you tell me what's wrong, Natalie." Her fingers started to tear into the leather seating. Natalie isn't there anymore. With that, Deborah's eyes widened as she got up. "I'll be right back. Please stay here." She walked out, leaving Natalie alone. Maybe if she had done something at this point, she wouldn't have come to be what she is today. Maybe more people would be alive, and maybe she would be the same again. As much as I would love to, I would admit that she got up from that chair and stopped this all from happening. But I am obliged to give you the horrid truth. Natalie did not move. She sat perfectly still. perfectly silent and perfectly calm in that chair, and after a while of waiting and impatience, her parents finally walked in. She stood happy to go, but she did notice her parents' expressions. Even her father had a strange saddened look on his face. Her confusion grew, but she had no words, and followed them to the car. On the way where she thought she was going back home, she started to drift off. Strangely, she heard a dark voice speak in her dream. It sounded almost like herself echoing through internal blackness. "Your time is up." She shot awake, some beads of sweat rolling down her face. She wasn't home, she wasn't in the car. She was in a bed, a white bed in a white room. She looked to her side, seeing that she was hooked up to a heart monitor. She went to get up, but suddenly realized she was bonded down. She panicked. She started to struggle, but paused, hearing the door to her left open. A man in a white shirt looked at her, his hands behind his back. He almost looked like one of those cliché doctors you would find in some scientific lab. She paid full attention to Mr. Scientist started to speak. "You must be very confused right now, I can imagine. But I'm letting you know we're only here to help. Your parents agreed to sign this contract to give you some mental drugs to hopefully help your state of mind." She opened her mouth to protest, but was quickly silenced. "You don't need to worry. You'll be back to normal in no time. Just try to relax." He walked over, and she tried skittishly moved away, but couldn't due to the bonds of the leather straps around her wrists and legs, and he carefully took a mask and put it over her mouth and nose. She stubbornly tried to get it off, but felt herself starting to slip under the drugs, and her eyes slowly shut. And suddenly she woke up. She couldn't comprehend what the hell she was seeing. She had been given multiple injections, even some things were rubbed on her skin. She felt woozy, but was completely aware of her surroundings. She was entering a rare state in which some patients go through while undergoing surgery. They were able to see as they were being worked on. They can feel the pain. Their brain is active, but they cannot respond. However, she was able to. Her heart rate on the monitor started to speed up, and the doctors took notice of this. They looked at her, seeing her opened eyes. One of the doctors was yelling at another. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she suddenly felt a rush of adrenaline. She slowly started to slip through her bonds, shaking violently. One of the doctors was going to hold her down, but was suddenly hesitant of doing so, and all three of the doctors backed away. She sat on the edge of the bed now, ripped off the mask and tube from her arm. She got up and started to stumble towards them. Her breath hitched, and her vision was blurry. She could only make out herself giving off a couple of insane chuckles. But suddenly she felt a searing pain in her chest. She gripped where her heart was supposed to be and dropped to her knees. She coughed blood and fell to the floor, completely blacking out. She woke up slowly and groggily after that, and was back in the bed. The doctor was sitting beside her bed. Something went horribly wrong. She didn't know why, but she felt a tremendous amount of hatred towards the doctor. He took notice of it and looked away. "You weren't supposed to wake up while we were giving you those doses for your mental state. We weren't sure how it affected you, but we have a feeling we're going to find out." He paused for a second before taking out a small mirror, not looking at her. "It happened to have an effect on your appearance as well." She looked at herself in the mirror, and her eyes widened. Her eyes, they were completely green. She noticed she had stitches in her mouth as well, but for some reason she couldn't help but feel happy. Her heart rate started to increase again. She gave out a loud chuckle. The doctor looked in shock, seeing that she was suddenly already standing over him. "Doctor," she said, still chuckling. He trembled slightly, pressing a button from under the monitor. "Yes? Your time is up." A loud scream was heard through the walls of the apparent hospital. 2 security guards rushed into the room, kicking open the door. Blood was the first thing they saw. Blood on the walls, on the bed, on the floor, hell, even on the ceiling. Natalie had taken the doctor and strapped him down on the bed. His spine was completely snapped, as the bed almost went into a sandwich, likely from the adjustments someone could make into it. Blood poured from his eyes, nose, mouth, and just about every orifice of his body. And there in the corner was the murderer. happily drawing her gruesome pictures on the wall in blood, followed by a phrase, "Your time is up." She slowly turned to look at them. A wide, crazy grin spread across her face. "Hello, friends. Would you like to play?" Ha 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 ha. The guards quickly pulled out their guns when suddenly she charged at one of them, being able to dodge his bullets. She grabbed a large knife from the sheath into his pocket and slashed it right across his waistline. Blood and organs flooded out, and he collapsed to the ground. She inhaled deeply, loving that damp stench of death. The other shook with fear and dropped his gun. She slowly walked up to him and placed the tip of the knife at his chest. "Your time is up." She slowly slid the knife down his chest, all the way to the end of his gut. His organs spilled out onto the floor as well, and collapsed and died. Natalie's mother was silently sleeping in her room next to her husband. She awoke to the sound of knocking on her door. She groggily got up and walked out of the bedroom. To the front of the door, it was completely pouring outside and thunder boomed in the distance. She walked up to the door and paused when she was about to grab the knob. There was a faint sound of insane laughter. The rain and thunder seemed to become quiet suddenly. She pressed her ear against the door and listened closely. "Hello, Mother." Natalie burst through the door, wielding 2 knives in hand. Her mother stumbled back, hitting her head against the coke rack. One of the hooks broke her into her skull, and she bled violently from the head onto the floor. She fell to the ground paralyzed, but still conscious. Natalie would tower over her, but slowly knelt down to meet the level of her eyes and showed her 2 knives covered in thick, red blood. "I was suffering, Mother." She ran the tip of the knife across her cheek. Cutting it slightly, Natalie tilted her head. "But you did nothing." All her mother could do was shake and gasp constantly like a fish on land. Natalie grabbed her mother and gently set her down on her back as she lay flat against the ground, and proceeded to sit on top of her and make a V cut on her chest. Her mother only gasped in shock, but her breath started to seem choke and gurgle. Natalie knew she didn't have much time left. She proceeded to forcibly open her chest cavity with a loud crack and reached in and grabbed her mother's heart as it slowly beat in her hand. Its pulses were growing dimmer and dimmer, and suddenly she ripped out, blood spraying all over her face as she stared at her mother directly in the face as she died. "Sweet dreams," she said to her mother's corpse. "Your time was up." She put her heart in her mother's mouth and patting the cheek softly, and stood up. She wasn't done yet. Natalie's father, David, had stirred awake and realized that his wife had not returned yet. His eyes adjusted to the darkness when he suddenly realized Natalie standing on his bedside, smirking crazily with her green eyes glowing in the darkness. Blood was all over her, and the scent was unbearable. She put on a fake sad face. "Oh dear, Mother's gone. I wonder who will get the money." Ha 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 ha. She suddenly grabbed her father's forehead. "That's all you ever cared about anyway." Her father, however, was a fighter, and he sprung up and grabbed her by the neck and threw her to the ground. He started to stomp on her chest until she coughed blood, and he stared at her. Does it feel good, Daddy?" She coughed up more blood. "After all, you never seemed to mind doing it all those years ago, didn't you?" She narrowed his eyes. "You aren't my daughter." A wider smirk spread across her face, and she looked at him with glowing eyes as blood dripped down her mouth. "You're right, I'm not." She suddenly tripped him, causing him to fall hard to the floor. She then got up, knives in hand. They say the bigger they are, the harder they fall. While he winded, she grabbed a pillow and stuffed it in his face and started to stomp on his face, harder and harder, hearing the loud cracking noises after a while. When she pulled up the pillow away, his face was gruesomely mutilated, and he was making muffled noises and crying in pain. "What's the matter, Daddy? Pain too much for you?" She stabbed both knives into his stomach, leaving them there for now, and she ripped off one of the large heavy wooden poles off the bed. She set it down on his legs and took out her knives. "Gonna need these," she chuckled, and she sat on the pole laid on his legs. Suddenly she began to walk back while sitting down. His weight from her body on the pole slowly started to squeeze innards up through his body. He started to gag and blood poured from his mouth. His breath was silenced as he hit a bit of a snag. Come on, she snarled, as she forced herself back walk with more weight. Suddenly his organs burst out of his mouth. The nasty gore piled onto the floor and the sides of his face. She nodded to his carcass and slowly began to walk out. Your time was up, Daddy. Finally, this would be her favorite part. She quietly snuck down to her brother's room, silently opening the door. Blood dripped from her knife, making a low tapping sound as the droplets hit the hard floor. Her brother wasn't in bed. It was apparent that he must be hiding somewhere. She grinned. Oh, dear brother, come now. She started to walk inside. All I want to do is have some fun. She stepped in more, listened closely for any sounds. Any breathing, any moving. She even sniffed the air for its putrid scent. And the closer she listened, she finally noticed something, a faint breathing noise. Whack! She fell to the ground, trembling. Her brother was behind her with a now bloodied baseball bat. He was glaring down in anger, panting in rage. She tried to slowly get up, but he hit her again and again and again. Mothers always did like you best, you bitch! He hit her hard one last time before taking a breather. She was bleeding heavily. Her green eyes dropped and glowed faintly in the darkness. She felt weak and looked up at the ceiling. She recalled the day she had spent here being tortured, having to go through it for 4 years, looking at that same damn ceiling. It was a sudden rush of energy to her body, and she started to stand laughing insanely. Her brother went to hit her again, but used both of her knives to block it. You're going to hell, brother! With a large push, she sent her brother flying on the bed. He hit his head against the wall and growled angrily, about to lunge at her. When he stabbed the 2 knives into his arms, keeping them pinned to the wall, he screamed and struggled rapidly. Let's see what we can use here. She started walking around the room and smirked, seeing a simple butter knife on his bedside. She picked it up and walked over to him. They say that the eyes are the softest organs of the body. She slowly licked the knife, soft as butter. He looked into the horror, tried to get away, and as she started to dig out his eyes with a knife, he shrieked loudly, and she quickly tied a cloth around his mouth. Now we can't have you waking the neighbors. He wasn't going to be seeing everything. The pain was unbearable. Blood leaked violently from his eye sockets. He would cry, but it was now incapable. She dug around for the item and picked up a pair of scissors and walked over to him, crawling over to him. I think you need to cut loose, brother. She stabbed the scissors into his gut and he cried, letting out a muffled scream of pain. She treated him like arts and crafts, cutting through his skin like paper. She lifted up his large intestines and smirked wickedly. You know what I love? Macaroni art. She started to cut the intestines into sections. These may be a bit too big to put on a plate, though. She could hear her brother foaming at blood at the mouth. However, he had to swallow the blood back because of the cough around his mouth. Doesn't that taste good? She licked the blood off of her fingers. I sure know I like it. He let out another muffled scream. She went down to his toes and started cracking them and ripping them off. One by one, after a while, his screams grew futile, and his throat was raw and bloody by now. Next, she worked on his fingers, snapping them and ripping them off slowly. The gurgling became louder, and he started to squirm. He was choking on his own blood, and she pulled the cloth down, and blood poured from his mouth. And he turned his head to the side and vomited violently. There, brother, she said, patting his head. Eat this and feel better. She stuffed one of his fingers in his mouth, jamming it into his throat. He choked and slowly died. Your time was up. The girl known as Natalie walking into her room dripping blood. Off of the corner she saw it, her stuffed giraffe. She knelt down and stared at it. Then without a word she stood back up and walked into the bathroom. Staring at herself covered in blood, she heard a faint ticking noise and she looked down and saw a pocket watch. She stared at its hands slowly turning, listening to the ticking for what seemed like an eternity. She took out one of her now red knives as it heavily dripped in blood into the counter. She grabbed the pocket watch and dismembered it watch only till a small clock was left. Time makes you live through the torture, she said, slowly bringing the knife up to her eye. She's slowly progressing through her life, being controlled by society. She started to slowly dig into her eye as her vision of her left eye grew blurry and red. Until you have no longer purpose, she felt her eyes started to relent from the socket, blood pouring into the sink. It's a vicious circle. She felt it dangled out of her socket, a sharp pain where it was connecting in her head. Time does not speed up. It does not slow down. It is violent. She grabbed into the cord of her eye and tore it right off, the eye falling in the sink. It makes you live through torture over and over again. She stared at the place where the clock in her eye, unable to fast forward from any of it. There was a squishing sound and drips of blood. It sounded like the clock fit perfectly in her socket. I am Clockwork. The young 16-year-old girl, used to be known as Natalie, walked away from her burning house. The flames engulfed everything, and inside the giraffe slowly burned, along with the carcasses of her family. Some say she still lives on, carrying her insanity with her, leaving so many dead, saying she decided when her time should come to an end. The only way to detect her presence is if you're cuddled close in the covers at night, sleeping soundly. But in the darkness, she watches, she determines. You hear ticking, and you see a green flash of that putrid eye socket. If she is there, you know your time is up.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Ms. Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.